The work of Giovanni Piranesi sparked considerable debate in its time, with many agreeing that his engravings are more than just an artist's fantasies. They appear to be a reflection of real events that occurred after some kind of global catastrophe. But he was far from the only one to document this strange and mysterious world. A whole generation of ruin artists left us astonishing evidence where the main subject is always the majestic, ancient ruins. Before us lies an entire world where ordinary Europeans, from the middle class to the nobility, go about their daily lives amidst the grandiose remnants of a former splendor. Some of these structures still exist today, having been turned into restored monuments or blatant replicas. However, most of what surrounded people just a short time ago has vanished, scavenged for practical needs. A startling fact unites all these scenes. The artist captured reality with photographic precision, without thinking about how their creations would be interpreted by future generations. But posterity proved ungrateful. They deemed their ancestors to be dark and uneducated fantasists, prone to exaggeration and fabrication. We are told to believe authoritative critics who label these paintings as fiction. But this creates a logical dissonance. When you see this magnificence, it's hard to accept that the artist rendered buildings that survive to this day with incredible accuracy, but simply invented the ones that are now gone from his own head. On what grounds should we draw this line? Why would that be the case? The truth, most likely, is that the artists invented nothing. They were the documentarians of their time, recording the world around them. And that world was strange. We see that in the 16th and 17th centuries. Just yesterday, in historical terms, a civilization of European peasants and herders, ruled by a handful of people in more expensive clothes, existed on the fragments of colossal megalithic structures. It is perfectly clear that they did not build them. The official explanation states that their distant ancestors built them, but then the Dark Ages arrived, a 1,000-year period during which all construction skills were lost. These people in the paintings look as if they just found these structures. They seem alien in this world of giants, not as builders, but as users. This raises the main question: who were these people in a world built for giants? Were they the heirs who had lost their ancestors' greatness and were now living on the ruins of the past? Or were they random settlers who discovered an empty world and adapted it to their modest needs? A closer look at these paintings, where life unfolds against a backdrop of ruins, reveals a profound cultural and technological gap. We don't see the descendants of great architects carefully preserving their heritage, but rather people who have simply adapted to the existing landscape. Shepherds graze their livestock in courtyards surrounded by colossal arches, and merchants set up their stalls in the shadow of grand colonnades. For them, these gigantic structures are not sacred temples or palaces, but merely convenient shelters from the weather, or a ready-made quarry from which to take stone for building a barn. There is an obvious dissonance between the mundane, earthly concerns of these people and the cyclopean scale of the architecture that surrounds them. They look out of place, like a tribe that accidentally stumbled upon an abandoned city of gods and repurposed it for their own needs. This gap becomes even more apparent when you pay attention to the details of the buildings themselves. The size of the ceilings and doorways is particularly striking. For a person of modern, or even that era's height, these dimensions seem absurdly large. From a construction standpoint, it's irrational, too costly, and labor-intensive. From a user's perspective, it's pointless and wasteful. Imagine a dwelling with such gigantic spaces. Even in a Mediterranean climate, it would be nearly impossible to heat in the winter, and in the summer, there would be no escape from the scorching sun. Ventilation in such rooms would turn into constant drafts. While a theory about a drastic climate change might explain some things, all the other questions remain unanswered. This leads to two main theories to explain this gigantism. Either the builders of these structures were giants, for whom such dimensions were normal, or it was so easy for them to build such colossal objects that they didn't think about rationality and resource conservation. The giant theory is appealing, but it falls apart when confronted with the facts. Where are their remains? Archaeology finds no evidence of an entire race of unusually large humanoids on Earth, aside from a few unique individuals. If such a race existed, how did it manage to disappear without a trace, leaving nothing behind but its buildings? Consequently, we are left with the second version. The builders were not giants, but they possessed capabilities that allowed them to disregard costs. This, however, only raises new questions. If they were people of our height, why did they need such huge doorways and ceilings? Perhaps these structures were not intended for human life as we understand it. We are facing the legacy of a completely different, unknown civilization, whose logic, goals, and abilities were radically different from our own. What kind of civilization was it? And what technologies did it possess to so easily erect such colossal structures? As if it were something mundane for them, not requiring titanic efforts. Putting aside the question of who these gigantic structures were intended for, we inevitably face an even more complex mystery. How were they built? Modern humanity, with all the power of its science and industry, struggles to complete projects of a similar scale. The construction of even a single skyscraper requires a colossal mobilization of resources, and here we are talking about entire cities, built of stone with astonishing precision and elegance. Let's imagine for a moment what is needed for such construction. First, a developed mining and raw materials industry is required. It was necessary not just to find, but to extract millions of tons of stone, be it travertine or other rocks. This implies the existence of quarries, tools for cutting and extracting blocks, and knowledge of geology. Second, industrial production of building materials, tools, and equipment is needed. The stone blocks had to be processed, given a perfect shape. This requires not primitive hammers and chisels, but high-precision and durable tools. Third, and this is one of the most difficult points, a developed system of transport and communication is essential. How do you deliver multi-ton blocks from the quarry to the construction site, often over tens or even hundreds of kilometers? This requires not just a cart drawn by oxen, but an entire infrastructure of roads, lifting mechanisms, and possibly special transport. Furthermore, coordinating such a large-scale project requires a communication system. Finally, at the core of all this must be a powerful scientific base, a system for collecting, analyzing, and accumulating knowledge, institutions for training engineers and architects, uniform standards, and a centralized government capable of managing this complex process. Now, let's return to the people we see in the paintings. The peasants and herders of the 16th and 17th centuries had none of the above. Their world was one of manual labor, primitive technology, and local communities. The gap between their capabilities and what surrounds them is so vast that it cannot be explained by a simple loss of knowledge. This isn't a situation where grandchildren forgot how their grandfathers built a complex machine. It's more like ants colonizing an abandoned microprocessor. They can use it, but they can never comprehend its nature, let alone reproduce it. In addition to the overall scale, the paintings also feature specific artifacts that confound official history. For example, in the works of Giovanni Paolo Panini, one can see a pyramid in Rome, even though the artist passed away 7 years before Europeans, according to the timeline, rediscovered the pyramids of Egypt. The pyramids depicted also have unusual proportions. The ratio of their height to their base is completely different from all known pyramids, be they Egyptian, American, or Chinese. What were these strange stone cypresses? they were clearly not built as tombs, as it's doubtful they had any usable cavities inside. What, then, was their purpose? It's unlikely they were erected purely for aesthetics. We see traces of technology that looks like magic to us, but any magic is just technology whose principles we cannot yet understand. It's like how a simple lighter or a smartphone seems like magic to a tribesman from the Amazon jungle. The builders of these structures possessed knowledge that seems mystical to us, but for them, it was entirely rational and mundane. However, if such a powerful and advanced civilization capable of such wonders existed, where did it go? Such knowledge and power cannot simply dissolve in time. They cannot be simply forgotten. Their disappearance must have been the result of something swift and all-encompassing. Something terrible must have happened. Studying the canvases of the ruin artists, one important detail becomes clear. The destruction they depict does not look like the result of bombardments or deliberate military annihilation. There are no bomb craters, no melted stones. The damage more closely resembles the effects of natural decay caused by time and natural disasters. Some parts were damaged by earthquakes, others deteriorated due to lack of maintenance. However, the juxtaposition of functioning fountains and pools with structures bearing signs of colossal erosion suggests that these buildings are of a very great age. But how old? The official chronology operates in millennia, but here a paradox arises. When it comes to confirming antiquity, historians talk about centuries and thousands of years. But when funding for restoration is needed, the same experts claim that if millions are not allocated immediately, the world will lose a precious heritage by spring. A heritage that stood for 12 centuries and is suddenly on the verge of collapse. This duality suggests that the real timelines might be very different. With the advent of photography, we gained the ability to track changes in natural and man-made objects over the last 100 to 150 years. It turned out that the rate of wear from natural forces on rock is often overestimated by a factor of about 10. What is dated to 5 to 7 centuries may, in fact, be no more than 100 years old. Granite and basalt cities cannot stand for thousands of years under the influence of rain, wind, and temperature changes while retaining their pristine appearance. What the painters documented in the late 17th and early 18th centuries could have been only 300 to 500 years old. The catastrophe that turned flourishing cities into ruins most likely occurred around the year 1700 in the traditional chronology. This is not a randomly chosen date. It was precisely at the turn of the 17th and 18th centuries that something global happened on Earth, affecting absolutely all spheres of life. This period is shrouded in mystery and strange coincidences. Suddenly, as if at the flip of a switch, a massive technological leap occurs. Almost all areas of human activity, from science to art, receive a powerful boost. It is during this time that the camera obscura appears, allowing artists to achieve that photographic precision which enables this very investigation. But the most important and strangest event of this period is the global calendar change. In the year 7208 from the creation of the world, which, by a strange coincidence, is the year 1700 AD, a new system of dating is adopted across Europe. This process looks like a forced reset of history, an erasure of the previous timeline and the imposition of a new one. Why was it necessary to sever such a huge chunk of time, numbering more than 7,000 years? This act looks less like a technical reform and more like a deliberate action to break the connection with the past. It's as if someone powerful pressed a reset button to start history from a clean slate on their own terms. Thus, the turn of the 17th and 18th centuries emerges as a kind of singularity point, after which the world became completely different. The paintings of the ruin artists, created during this and the subsequent period, show us the world immediately after this catastrophe. Fresh ruins, not yet overgrown with forest, but already inhabited by new people who look bewildered and lost among the fragments of a former greatness. If a catastrophe did indeed happen, and the old world was destroyed or radically changed, it is logical to assume that those who came to power after it, be they surviving elites or new forces, had to create a new version of history. A history that had no place for the previous great civilization, its technologies, and its achievements. But how, and more importantly, why did they do it? If a global catastrophe did occur at the turn of the 17th and 18th centuries, it left behind not only physical ruins but also an information vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and politics even more so. This void had to be filled with something. Thus, a new, official version of history was born, designed to explain what happened, and, more importantly, to conceal its true scale and causes. The perfect tool for such a cover-up became the concept of the Dark Ages. Take a look at the official timeline. Between the brilliant era of antiquity and the Renaissance lies a gap of 1,000 years. We are told this was a time of total decline, regression, and oblivion, when humanity supposedly lost all the knowledge and skills of its great ancestors. This 1,000-year hole in history looks extremely suspicious. It is too convenient to be true. It allows for any inconsistencies to be written off, explaining any technological marvel of antiquity with a simple, "they knew how back then, but later forgot." This concept doesn't look like a historical period, but like an artificial insert, a patch covering something we are not supposed to see. The authors of this chronology, which forms the basis of our modern view of history, are considered to be the Jesuit scholars Joseph Scaliger and Dionysius Petavius. It was they who, in the 16th and 17th centuries, systematized and organized historical events, creating the timeline we still use today. But what if they weren't just systematizing, but constructing? What if their task was not to restore the past, but to create a new, approved reality? One where there was no place for a previous, highly developed civilization. Just 10 to 15 years ago, even mentioning a fabricated 1,000-year medieval period could have ended a scholar's career. Today, with the initial shock past, even renowned academics calmly discuss the possibility of such a chronological adjustment. But why was this great deception necessary? The motives, as always in high politics, are purely pragmatic. The first and foremost motive is the legitimization of new power. Those who found themselves at the top after the catastrophe had to legalize their right to rule. If they admitted to being merely random survivors who settled on the ruins of a more powerful civilization, their authority would be zero. But if they presented themselves as saviors who led humanity out of the Dark Ages and revived the great legacy of the past, that's a completely different story. In this way, squatters become rightful heirs. The second motive is control through amnesia. A people deprived of their true history becomes a blank slate on which anything can be written. Any ideology can be instilled in them, any goal set for them. A person who does not know who their ancestors were cannot fully understand who they are and what they are capable of. This is an eternal principle of governance. To control the future, you must control the past. We see modern examples before our eyes. Any new regime begins by destroying monuments and rewriting textbooks to erase the memory of its predecessors and establish its own version of the truth. Finally, the third motive is the appropriation of legacy. By creating the myth of direct succession from great ancestors, the new elites automatically claimed all their achievements. The Colosseum was built not by unknown giants with incomprehensible technologies, but by our ancestors, the Romans. Thus, all the greatness of the past became the foundation for the greatness of the present. But if the truth about the creators of these cyclopean structures was so carefully hidden from us, perhaps the lie is much deeper than we think. What if not only the history of the last few centuries was falsified, but the very foundation of our worldview? What if behind the concealment of the truth about the ancient builders lies an even more shocking secret concerning the origin of man himself? What if our entire civilization is built on a false foundation, and we misunderstand not only our past, but also our own nature? If we assume that humanity in its current form is not the degraded descendant of a great civilization, but rather its younger sibling, or even its domesticated animal, then many oddities in our culture and history acquire a frighteningly logical explanation. We may be witnessing a grand cargo cult that has stretched across centuries. A cargo cult is a term describing the behavior of Melanesian tribes who, after encountering the technology of white men during World War II, began to imitate their actions in the hope of receiving the same benefits. They built airplanes and runways out of straw and painted medals on their bodies, believing that these rituals would compel the gods to send them valuable cargo again. Now, let's look at our own history. We have inherited fragmented memories of certain technological processes whose essence we no longer understood. But we copied the external form of these processes with astonishing accuracy, turning them into religious rituals. Think about it. What does praying before an icon resemble? A person stands before an image and speaks to it. Outwardly, this is very similar to a video call session. Could the icon be a distant, distorted echo of some communication device, and prayer an attempt to turn it on? We haven't even figured out how to properly use some of the artifacts we inherited. Take bronze cannons, for example. We started stuffing them with gunpowder and cannonballs, lighting them to fire a shot. But how were these copper tubes used before us? Perhaps they weren't weapons for launching projectiles at all, but something entirely different, based on other physical principles. To understand this logic, we only need to look at our pets. When I start sharpening a knife in the kitchen, all the animals come running, the cats and the dog. A clear connection has been established in their minds. If the master, the god, rubs a magic wand against a magic crystal, pieces of meat or sausage will soon materialize out of thin air. They don't understand the entire process: sharpening the knife, butchering the meat, cooking the food. For them, it is a sacred ritual that guarantees the appearance of food. If we imagine these animals becoming even more intelligent, they might start repeating this ritual themselves. They would rub sticks together with deep faith that if they do everything correctly, food will appear just as it did for their master god. It seems our own masters went away somewhere, leaving us alone, and we are still looking at the sky, mumbling memorized phrases in temples, and believing that a miracle is about to happen. This analogy leads us to a shocking but logical conclusion. The civilization that left behind the megalithic ruins was at such a high level of development that, to our ancestors, they were gods. The gap between them was no less than that between a modern human and a tribesman from the Amazon jungle. To that tribesman, everything seems like magic, from a can of soda to a laser show. If we were to suddenly disappear, he would use the items he inherited for a while. He would certainly use a knife for its intended purpose, but a microwave oven, at best, would be adapted to store dishes. And when all these items wear out, he would most likely return to his familiar stone axes. But another scenario is possible. This advanced knowledge, in the form of incomprehensible but useful objects, could trigger development, and in a few centuries they might start building something new in the jungle. It seems the second scenario is what happened to us. We inherited not only ruins, but also precise knowledge of the planets, stars, the calendar, and a solid set of tools that allowed us to develop our own production. To them, we were something like useful, quick to learn, but still domesticated animals. We can support ourselves and even feed our masters, unlike cats, for whom we are the slaves. This version also explains the gigantic size of the structures. They weren't built for us. We just lived alongside them, like a mouse living in the basement of a human house. But if we accept this hypothesis, it immediately raises the most fundamental, most important questions for humanity. If we were created or tamed, for what purpose? What was our function in the world of those who effortlessly raised cities from mountains? This chain of reasoning leads us to the final, most important, and perhaps most unsettling hypothesis, which concerns not so much the past as the very essence of our existence. To find a solution, we must propose what seems at first to be a wild theory. Our world was created as it is, all at once. Someone created humans but immediately realized that in this form, they wouldn't last a day. Unlike any other animal, a human is completely unequipped for survival in the wild. We have no fangs, no claws, no fur, no powerful muscles. We are just a naked, warm, and defenseless bundle of life on bones. The perfect meal for any predator. Therefore, it is obvious that by placing this gentle, fragile creature among rocks, forests, and rivers, the Creator was obligated to teach it how to survive, and provide it with a minimal set of knowledge, skills, and tools. But even that is not enough. Like any normal, caring owner, they had to provide humans with shelter. Even the most neglectful owner will build a kennel for a puppy before bringing it home. When you buy hamsters, you also get them an entire plastic town with houses, ladders, and water dispensers. And then you watch with amusement as your pets run between floors, drink water, and hide in their shelters. Does that sound familiar? Don't the people in the paintings of ruins behave in the exact same way? They live in a ready-made environment, not created by them, using it as they see fit. This comparison may seem crude and even cynical, but it helps to grasp the main idea. The ruins we see are not the legacy of our ancestors. They are our first kennels, our starter hamster cages, provided to us by the Creator so that we could survive the initial stage. This seemingly wild conclusion is the only logical explanation for the paradox of how a completely defenseless creature not only survived, but became the dominant species on the planet. It was given a head start, knowledge, tools, and most importantly, ready-made city shelters. But no sane owner gets a pet just for the sake of it, without a purpose. Every creature has a function. We breed dogs for specific tasks. Some for hunting, others for guarding, some for fighting, and others simply to adorn our homes. If this analogy holds true, then we too were created with a specific, concrete purpose. We are not a random product of evolution, but the result of intentional selection or engineering. We are an accessory to something more important, a mechanism for protecting something very valuable. And this leads us to the final mystery. If we are guardians, what are we guarding? It's not necessarily something material. Perhaps this territory, which we call our home, holds something that cannot be touched by hands, but has enduring value for our creators. And it may very well be that this is the elusive spirit, the unique energy of a place that philosophers and poets try to describe. It turns out that the old paintings are not just images of ruins, they are windows into our true past, a key to unlocking our true nature. They vividly demonstrate that humans appeared on this planet simultaneously with ready-made megalithic structures, knowledge, and tools for further development. The ruins can indeed speak, we just need to learn to understand their language. By studying them, we are not studying stones, but ourselves. The answers to the ultimate questions, who are we, where are we from, and why are we here, do not lie in falsified chronicles, but right there, before our eyes, in the silent majesty of these ancient walls. And this is our chance, a chance gifted to us by those artist documentarians. A chance we must seize together to try and uncover the true history of humanity.